Hey everyone. So I know I haven't been on here for so long, and the sad thing is that I really haven't had anything to shoot because I'm pretty busy with real estate mortgages full time now. So as sad as that is, I just haven't been shooting actively. And then when I do have down days, I really struggle to come up with content when I don't have any new footage. I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks that I can start shooting and coming up with some new content so that I can continue to share whatever it is that I do with you guys. As well, if you ever have any ideas or want to see something specifically, please reach out. You can reach out to me in my Facebook group or in any comment of any video here, and I'd be happy to look into it. So today I decided, you know what, I think I have an idea that I can show you guys that is actually going to be something that you don't see very often. And for me, I am obsessed with 1883, the series. That's the prequel to Yellowstone. And if you watch the show and you see the open of the show, the majority of the portraits that they do of the characters are in the old daguerreotype format. Now, I'm not sure if they actually shot with a daguerreotype camera and used the chemical processes, but I figured out some steps in Photoshop that you can take an image that you've shot either with window light or in studio and actually apply various techniques to make it look like it might be an authentic daguerreotype. So if you're interested in that, and I always have been, like, one of my biggest points of interest with these types of images, like I used to go in various restaurants and that, and one restaurant in particular in San Antonio in Texas it was a baseball theme, so they had all these old vintage team pictures up on the walls, and they were all shot with this type of chemical process. And I have to say that I was always just mesmerized by them. First of all, I wanted to know how the heck did they get the eyes so light? Like, everybody's eyes are so light. And the majority of the images that I saw were shot with natural light. So as photographers, we know that the only way to get the eyes super, super bright is by adding fill flash. But I know they didn't do that. So the more research I did, the more I learned that it's actually the chemical process and the techniques that they use. And what happens is all of the lighter colors in these images will get much brighter. So for this technique to work in Photoshop, my advice to you is when you're doing your retouching, especially if you're shooting somebody with really light eyes or blue eyes, doesn't necessarily work with people with dark eyes, but with lighter eyes, make sure you go in and dodge the crap out of them. So make them as bright as possible because it will really lend itself to looking like a true daguerreotype, okay? Then do your basic retouching, and what I'm going to do now is just walk you through 3 images that I've already done using these techniques and these steps, and then at the very end I will do one from scratch in front of you so you can see exactly how you can do it and what options you may have, okay? So I hope you enjoy this. Now let's get into it. Okay, so this is one of the images from the show 1883. It's one of the portraits they've done of one of the characters, and as you can see, I am not sure if this was actually done in true form daguerreotype with a camera and everything, or if this was created in Photoshop. But you can look and you can see, if you look into his catch lights of his eyes, it looks like there's an highlighter reflector that comes in, which you would have needed some light to bounce underneath this big, huge brim, because you can see there's a light source from above, but they definitely needed to add in a reflector to get this look. So you can see also, if you look at this image, pretty much his eyes and his mustache, a little bit of his chin, not the tip of his nose, nasal folds. This is really the only part of the image that has any clarity to it. There's a tiny bit here and a little bit here, but then there's not. It's kind of all over the place, which kind of tells me that this wasn't really shot with an actual daguerreotype camera, because you can look over here, you can see it's sharp over here on this edge, And then you go further into the depths here, and it's sharper here. So I would say this was done in Photoshop. So I'll just show you how I think I figured at least a little bit of this out. Okay, so here's my first image. This is just a generic corporate headshot, but I wanted to use this because I just wanted to see if we could take a modern day generic headshot. And what I've done, and I don't have the first step on this one, I apologize. I did do a whole bunch of field blur, and I kept his face sharp just in this area. So you can see the rest of him is pretty much blurred. And I did that using field blur, which I'll show you in the last image. And then the next thing I did was my dodging and burning. So you can see here that it's a little heavy-handed. But again, like I said, you need the eyes to be brighter. And I just used dodge and burn to get rid of shadows and highlights and stuff like that that weren't very complimentary. So the next thing that I did, let's open this group, is I did a gradient map. So this is just a black and white gradient map. The next thing I did was a second gradient map, but this time instead of using black and white, I used these colors. So I used like a brown, and then I went to a beige. And I just thought I would try that and see if it added to more of that vintage look. And then I did a bit of color balance where I added back some of that yellow and red. Then I ran it through Alien Skin Exposure 4, and they do have some kind of daguerreotype black and whites in the vintage collection within Exposure 4. So I thought this was pretty good, and then to finish it off, I added another levels adjustment that just added back some of the yellows and the reds. So I think this is pretty good. Like, when you consider where it came from, like just this generic headshot into this kind of daguerreotype. But you see how the light in the eyes are what really truly help make it look legitimate. Okay, so let's look at the second one. So I thought I would take this image that I had previously edited many, many years ago because it had a lot of really good highlights and darks. So again, what I did was I went into field blur. So you can see that's before, that's after, and all I did was I set my points and I made sure that her face was the sharpest. And then the next thing that I did, open this group up, I started with another gradient map, a black and white. Then I did another one like I did before. You come in here and it's the same kind of browns and beiges. And then I added a curves adjustment just for contrast, right? And then I went into Alien Skin, and this is the same one I used before, did a little bit of color balance here, and this is the final image. I don't know necessarily if this looks truly authentic, but I thought it was a cool, fun little test. Okay, so then the next one. So this was an image that I shot many years ago, and I already converted it to what I thought at the time was this kind of vintage look, which is what I was going for. At the time, I thought it was pretty good, but now coming back into it many years later, I see so much wrong with it. So to start off, this is the original, and then I went in and did my field blur, so now you can see that everything is blurred except for her face. And then I had to fix the dodging and burning because, it just wasn't good. So you can see I came in here, was pretty heavy-handed. So this is the burn, and this is the highlights. So you can see I corrected quite a few things and added a lot of light into her eyes. And then the next thing I did was another gradient map, but this time instead of using black and white, because it was already in black and white, I just came in and I did browns, and this time I wanted it to go to whites. So what happens if I change the white? Well, you click on the white and you can change it to another color. So if we're in the kind of yellow oranges in here, you could change it to something like this, or you can go a little more yellow. But you can change the look based on these settings. Clicked OK. Let's go back. Then I did a bit of a curves adjustment because I wanted that contrast curve to pop a little bit more. And then I ran it through Alien Skin like this. And then I added some more color balance, and a little bit of levels. And you can see that that extra dodging in the eye area for the end of this image really actually made it. So don't underestimate how important it is to add light into light colored eyes. Now, if you're dealing with somebody with brown eyes, they're going to be lighter, but they're not going to be as light as blue eyes are. So we're going to work on this image, and I'm going to show you the steps all the way through, and it's super, super easy. The first thing I need to determine with this image is, first of all, her eyes are light blue. And I've already done retouching. This, again, is several years old, so my retouching techniques are pretty different now. But I'm going to open up my dodge and burn. First, I'm just going to zoom in, and I'm going to add some points of light because I know how important it is to make sure that this technique is done properly, and that means adding a specific amount of dodging into your subject's eyes. So this is just adding some highlights so that it's not just a flat light color. I just really want little points of light. So you can see I'm just kind of going like that. And just add a bit more in this one. And same thing with the rest. I'm just going to add some highlights because it's just so much better if you make sure that you have a lot of highlights and shadows done kind of over the top for this technique. I'm going to come in and really just add these highlights in this way. So just add them where they already exist and you should be fine. I'm going to actually add a little bit of light on the white of her eye here. It looks a little crazy to me actually, because I think I might have issues. Little blobs, but that's okay. We can figure this out together. Okay, so I think that's okay. I'm gonna just burn in a little bit in here, just for a little more definition. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, if you go back to old photos and you go to edit them, I can see so many mistakes that I used to do. But that's okay, like this little blob right there. What is that? I'm gonna have to get rid of that little blob because you know me and my OCD. Add a little highlight here, little highlight here. And I would fill this in now, and I would take away that now. Like there's so much I would do. You could even take your dodge tool and just lighten up some of these shadows just so that they're not so dark, because I feel like that contrast really draws your eye over there and it really shouldn't. But for this, I'll just go kind of quick and lazy like. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit of highlight here, a little bit here. I think that's plenty. So I'll close this before and after. I know it looks a little crazy, but it should work for this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flatten that. And now I'm going to duplicate my layer, and now we're going to do the field blur. So go to your blur gallery, choose field blur. And this first point, I'm going to drag it right between her eyeballs, and I'm going to turn it all the way to 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one here, add one here. I'm at about 19 for blur on this. I try to keep it all pretty even all over. So you can see, we might want to pull that down just a bit, that all of these are pretty good. I'm just going to pull the blur back a bit around her head because I think it's a little bit much. What I like about field blur too is you don't get that haloing effect like you do with the other typical blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, so I'd say that's pretty good. Click OK. And that's before and that's after. So now you can see you can reduce your opacity if you feel like it's a little heavy. Something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and flatten because I can do that now. And then we're going to do a sharpen layer first because this image was probably shot with my 85, knowing me back then, and it's never really super sharp. So we'll change this to linear light, filter, other, high pass. This is my favorite sharpening technique, and we're just going to look. Usually the rule is as soon as you start seeing, you know, the highlights and stuff, it's a little too much, so pull it back until you don't see those kind of highlights anymore. That should be good. And now I'm just going to hold down my Alt Option mask, and now I'm just going to paint that on the areas that I want to be sharper. So mostly her beautiful eyeballs. See how much that helped? Maybe her lip. A little bit on her hair here. And that's about it. So that's just going to help us, because one thing I know is if I was shooting with my 85 1.2, it would definitely be soft. So that's before, that's after. I think that looks really good. Okay, now let the fun stuff begin. Okay, so gradient map. First thing I want to do is change this from perceptual to classic. Okay, now click on that. We're going to turn this one to more of a brownish gray. So not jet black. We're going to touch this one and change this one to more of a goldish color, yellowish, something like that. Click OK. Click OK. All right, so now we have our first step, which is this. And the next thing I want to do is add a curves adjustment just for contrast again, like I've been doing. Whatever points suit your image better. So I think that one is good. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so I'm not going to bother with the coloring just yet. I'm going to stamp this. So Shift, Option, Command, E to stamp it. And now I can come up into Filter, Alien Skin, Exposure 4. And now this will bring up that last filter that I used, which is this one. And you can see over here in the presets of Black and White Films Vintage, you have a lot of options, like a ton, right? You can come into more of the sepia. This is the calotype. If you scroll down, then you come into the daguerreotypes, like this one. This is damaged. This is the one that I've been using. I just felt like it was probably the best for what I wanted to do. This one's pretty good too. If we just go to daguerreotype sepia, like here, which is good too, what we'll do is we'll start playing. First of all, let's get rid of a lot of that grain because that's just way too much. And now we need to start playing with, let's give you a little bit of a vignette, something like that. And I definitely feel like we need those highlights to pop. I think that's pretty good. And we are matted out just a wee bit. Let's come into our sharpening and just hold down your Alt or Option key and mask just to see where it's sharpening, so that's fine. Let's pull up the blacks a bit, right about there, and let's see if we add in a little bit of yellow. Now let's come down to our textures or borders like here, and now let's find one that actually suits this one a bit more. You can try the Polaroids, but I don't think that they really suit this image. Coming into vintage again. I like that one, but I also feel like this one needs some texture. So if we add in these dots, to me just never really look very authentic. The paper one usually is one that I prefer. You just got to find the right one. You can also change the blend mode. Something like that. And as far as the border, you can reduce the opacity on it if it's too much. So something like that. Come back to my grain and just make sure that the roughness is down, the highlights are up. And I'm just going to add a wee bit more black. Click apply. And what I usually do is I usually will reduce that here. And that'll bring back a lot of your color. But yeah, and that's how you do it. So let's just turn these off. So we started with that, just added a couple of easy little adjustment layers, and you can end up with something sort of like this. And now if you want to, you can come in and do a color balance, and I usually add in a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red. You can come to the highlights, you can add in blue, but then it starts looking not exactly real. If you want, you can come in and create another levels, and then you can kind of fade it out a little bit more. You can also reduce the highlights down here and then bring them back up here. It just depends on what you want with this. Bring in some black. And there you have it. I hope you learned something. I would love to see what images you might create using these techniques. So if you want to, please share them in my Facebook group. And yeah, it's super fun. I think I'm going to do a couple more just for something fun to do. So until the next video, see you guys later.